Hi, this is Dr. Harben, and I want to make a brief comment. And it's been a while since I've been on here, but certainly there's been an awful lot of stuff that has happened relative to Brexit. And although I don't have the time right now to talk about everything, I want to make one point that is getting lost somehow in the media relative to all this shenanigans that's happening in Parliament. And that has to do with Parliament's position on a no deal Brexit. So when Theresa May was prime minister, her fault was probably that she was trying to really focus on getting that deal that she had negotiated with the EU through Parliament and convincing them that it was the best deal or no deal. So it was either her deal or no deal. And she wasn't really even focused on the fact that no deal was a possibility. That wasn't something that she was trying to leverage. And for reasons that I'm not going to get into here because it would be a whole nother video, but she lost her role as prime minister and Boris Johnson was elected. Now, for whatever it's worth, Boris has been clear from the beginning that Brexit was going to happen. After all, the referendum was a 52-48% result. 17.5 million Brits voted to leave the EU. And Parliament, frankly, has been goofing around for the last almost 3 years and not getting it done. Now, certainly there's some legitimate issues with the current negotiated withdrawal agreement with the EU relative to the Northern Ireland situation and the backstop. For those of you not familiar, if the current negotiated agreement was accepted, it is perceived to be an opportunity for the EU to still control Northern Ireland because Northern Ireland and its border with the Republic of Ireland would still be an open border, and with the Republic of Ireland being an EU member, Northern Ireland, if it was going to have that open border with this backstop arrangement, Northern Ireland would be subject to the laws and the regulations of the EU, which is counter to what the UK wanted. So that's been a sticking point. However, the UK has very little leverage to negotiate on, and Boris Johnson knows this. So he's been very clear from the very beginning, we're going to get out. Currently, the date is October 31st, and he said that the UK is going to get out with or without a deal. And he said no deal will happen if there isn't a deal. So he made it clear that if they can't renegotiate a deal with a better option to the Northern Ireland and the backstop, that he was prepared to take the UK out of the EU without a deal. Now, here's what that would mean. It means October 31st, the UK would immediately stop being a member of the EU. Any payments paid to the EU for membership in the EU would stop from the UK. And this is the thing that the business world is concerned about. But frankly, the larger business world has been prepared for this for a couple of years now. They knew this was a possibility. So they're not unprepared. There are small businesses that have struggled to kind of keep up. But for the most part, large businesses have been prepared for this for some time. They're just saying, get on with it. But relative to trade, if the UK gets out of the EU without a deal, without a prearranged trade agreement as part of the settlement to leave, then all trading would revert back to WTO rules. Any goods coming into the UK and going out of the UK would be subject to the standard tariff through WTO, and those rules would be in place. But there are rules, and it's important to realize that the EU stands to be hurt from a no-deal Brexit as well. This is not going to be as critical as the politicians and the media over in UK would have you to believe, because if there would be a no-deal Brexit, both sides would be incentivized to scramble to get deals done and written for the sake of their economies. So there might be some pain for a short period of time, but it would not be the death blow to the UK or to the EU, as some have claimed. Now, here's the problem, and this is where Parliament has been excruciatingly frustrating throughout this whole thing. They have hung their hat on preventing a no deal Brexit. They recently passed a bill that is now the law of the land because of royal assent this week, that basically says Parliament does not want you, Prime Minister Boris Johnson, to do no deal. We're going to make it illegal for you to do no deal. So this new bill requires or says that unless there is a deal in place by October 19th, Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, is required by this law to go and ask the EU for another extension. The original date to get out was March 29th of 2019. It was extended when Theresa May couldn't get her deal passed through Parliament, and it failed 3 times. This date was extended to the current date, October 31st. But this law tells Boris Johnson, you're required to either get a deal by the 19th of October, and if you can't, you're further required now by law to go ask the EU for an extension to January 31st of 2020. Boris Johnson finds this excruciatingly offensive, ridiculous, and I tend to side with him, and here's why. If you take no deal off the table, then the UK has no leverage whatsoever to renegotiate a deal with the EU to cover the backstop. Why would the EU change? What would they risk? Because right now, if the EU knows that the Brits just can't leave on their own with no deal, they don't have the power based on a law, why would the EU give up what they think is right in the backstop? What can Boris Johnson possibly use as leverage to say, listen, Brussels, you either work with us on redeveloping this backstop or coming up with a better solution for Northern Ireland, or we're going to be out like that. And this is the ridiculous thing. It's been political posturing for 3 years. There are 16 political parties in Parliament, and all of them are trying to use this to make a name for themselves. Every time the lead Scottish parliamentarian stands up, he's blathering on about this is going to be another opportunity for Scotland to leave. Well, they tried that, and the referendum failed. But this is what I'm talking about. They are leveraging this. They're not trying to get the will of the British people done. 52% voted, let's get out of the EU. They're not working on it, and they're hamstringing Boris Johnson. Now, Boris Johnson comes off as a buffoon. He's not the best, most eloquent member of Parliament ever. But in this case, he's right. They need to have the ability to do a no-deal Brexit. Now, he's not completely out of tools. The way the law it works, as far as I read it, it requires that he asks for an extension. It doesn't require that he gets an extension, because you can't write a law that requires the EU to do anything. So, the way the EU is made up, any decision on an extension has to be unanimous. So Boris Johnson, if he doesn't have a deal done by October 19th, he can go to the EU and say, my Parliament requires that I ask you for an extension. And if one member of the remaining 27 countries in the EU says, nah, it won't pass. They won't get the extension. And Boris Johnson can come back to the UK with cover saying, the law required me to ask. I asked. The EU refused. We are getting out without a deal. And right now, there is scuttlebutt for lack of a better definition, that France might be that one EU country to deny an extension. France's foreign minister has indicated such. Macron is just not happy. He's tired of this. This has been going on too long. The EU has a hard time moving forward when this keeps going on like this. So Boris Johnson has suspended Parliament. They're not going to be in session for a few weeks now. That's ticked all the parliamentarians off, but frankly, they weren't doing anything anyhow, other than making speeches. This could give Boris Johnson the opportunity to go to sympathetic EU states and get a commitment to deny the extension. So stay tuned. This is a fascinating exercise in political statesmanship. It's a very important situation for businesses to be paying attention to. International businesses, U.S. Businesses are watching this, and people might say, well, why? Because when the UK gets out, the UK would be free to negotiate its own trade deals with the U.S. Right now, if the U.S. wants to negotiate a trade deal with the UK, it has to go through the EU because it's a trade deal with the EU. So U.S. businesses are watching. Other countries are watching. I have to imagine members of the African Union, which isn't as far developed as the EU, is watching as well. So stay tuned. I will keep you up to date as much as I can with my own thoughts about this. Brexit is a bloody mess. It is an example of political weak planning. There's not a whole lot of political courage being extended here, at least on the part of Parliament. So hope you have a good rest of your day. And as always, if you have a question, go ahead and hit the link below and contact me. I'll be happy to talk. See ya.